You can't say I got a slot for the. All right. So we talked about this. Remember the issues of Dred Scott, not citizens. Property. Repeal. So why did Tiny rule that way? On a DBQ, you have to use 4 documents, 2 per body paragraph, as evidence. You must paraphrase them. You don't quote documents on document-based questions in this class. You hear what I said? Not quote, paraphrase. Quote, you rip up your paper and you go back to second. I don't make the rule. Don't quote.
Do you set like a citation?
Yes. At the end of the sentence, you
Where you got that document?
it's the way they like it. The best way, because you want to make sure you get credit for it, is you say you said it. Abraham Lincoln said something like that, and at the end of the sentence, you put down parentheses doc, hey, whatever the document is. I started trying to teach double citation. Say you did it at the end, because they literally will check it off. The exam, and virtually everyone in my class, I didn't mean one person actually. So we just got to do it. So a good question, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But for 2 of the documents, you must add an additional sentence. Now, I start calling it the why statement, because all you want to do is why they made this. So why did the Tiny court do this? And that's what we got to get to right here. Why did they rule this way? Why did Tiny and the Tiny court? And there's basically 4 things that we could use. What's going on, AKA historical context, stuff going on at that time. So let me give you an example of stuff going on at that time. And these are all ones that you should know. Kansas, I put that in all caps. Remember, leading Kansas. Secessionalism. Positive, good theory. But also we have the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The creation of this new free soil party called the Republican Party. These are all issues that increased sectionalism. So part of the reason they made this ruling would be sectionalism. You just need one reason. I'm giving you a bunch of reasons. You just need one reason why they made that claim, a why statement. We don't need a big deal on which one you choose. Historical context to me is the easiest, but my mind works that way. Another thing, audience, who's he talking to? Who's it? So, don't face it, telling them we're unified, or telling them to unify with the South. South, I put in quotes for Southern politicians. Also, maybe Free Soilers. Basically telling Free Soilers that you don't need to have your party anymore. No reason to have this divisive party. But it's also telling them they're unified. This one, I don't think is good. This one's harder. Yeah. To me personally, trying to pick who they're talking to is difficult, especially if you get a document out of the blue. Point of view. What is the point of view of Taney? Well, not just Taney, but the other members of the Supreme Court who made this ruling. Well, and by the way, that's a statue of Taney, very controversial one in Baltimore. Most of them were slave owners. I should put in that statement. Taney wasn't, but he was sympathetic to them. He had emancipated his slaves back in 1818. But also, he's a compromiser, and he undoubtedly, and talking about why Republicans. Undoubtedly, when he talked about whites or blacks not having rights. Now let's get to the one that I think is a very good reason why. Purpose. He wanted to solve the problem of sectionalism. Solve this problem. That's his purpose. Wow, here's the biggie. Here's the biggie. Any one of those is a reason why. So for 2 of the 4 documents, we will do this. Now, when I first learned about this, they made this change in that they used to do it a different way for the essay. They made the change for the College Board who does the exam 10 years ago. So I have to adjust my essays because I also want to help you with the exam. There's a little bit of critical thinking to add a sentence why. They called it, when I first learned about it, I went to this thing, making all these massive changes. They called it HAP for AP US History. HAP. It is. And I still sometimes call it half because, that's what I first learned it. But to me, that's more confusing. It's just why? Why they made this? Oh, it's wise. Why? So if I sometimes say half, I mean the why statement. I can't help it because that's what I first learned. So it just kind of ingrained. So the why statement. Why a document makes it. Why it could be a political cartoon, it could be a map, it could be a painting, or most commonly a short excerpt from a speech or writing that a newspaper or somebody had. You're going to get the documents on Friday, the essay question and the documents. And most of the documents are short. And you have to use 4, and I think this one has 7. So you can throw out 3. Don't like it, don't use it. You're not sure what it means, don't use it. You have choice. So blank believe this because of, and then that's the historical context, audience purpose. For me, historical context or purpose. That's what we want. You come up with a reason. The tiny core believe this because of this. And that's the same. You have to have that twice. So on the AP exam, it's a 7-point scale. That's a point. It adds up, doesn't it? 1/7. Heck, you get a good thesis and follow your thesis, that's 2 points. You use 4 documents, that's 2 points. You get this, that's a point. And you're already sitting there with 5 out of 7. You're in really good shape. Really good shape. Had a couple examples of your own knowledge. They call it outside information. You bring in, that's another point. Heck, you get 5 on the AP exam. That's what it is. Last year they did really well. They've been doing really well on the DBQs in this class. Partially because we got students who take AP Euro, a little bit of practice. Those of you who took AP Euros, very similar, isn't it? Basically, a little different. But, and we rock well. This is in school. We have good students. You guys is good. So here's an example of a very brief, this is a little bit shorter than a document would be, right? And let me give you a why statement. Sound good? That is a why statement. Now, this is another tip I learned on that first, this is years ago. Before you make this statement, you have to do it twice in an essay. Put a little star right here. You're telling the person reading this, assessing you, hey, I'm making an important statement. All of them, they keep it easy. You want to make it easy for the person assessing. That's why we underline your thesis. That goes back to helping the person writing. You want them to make sure they find everything. Little star. Here it comes. Here goes my half. Don't forget to give me the point. And that's why we cite things twice. Don't forget to give me the point. I grade 100 essays. I miss stuff. I'm going to miss stuff. Think about when the people grading the AP exam, part of the reason I don't want to do it, because I don't want to sit and grade it. More power to those who can do it, but they grade 1,000 essays. You see why they might miss them. We've had a couple of teachers here, and they like it, but it's hard work. All right. That is how we do it. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. Gee, here's a paragraph, but we'll come back to that. So let's get back to notes. The panic of 1857 happened. Same year. So this is another one is about over speculation. We're not going to go into all the details of it, but this led to factory closures, especially textile mills. If textile mills close their doors, what happens to the demand for cotton? If textile mills close their doors, what happens to the demand for cotton? Down. And what happens to the price for cotton if demand drops? Down. Because they have to basically give their cotton away. It's happening right now, by the way. We've had 9 straight months of lower manufacturing production. 9 straight months right now. So we have this weird thing where we have raw materials
are dropping in price, and yet final products are raising in price. We have a weird economy right now. So if cotton prices are tumbling, you can imagine what's happening. Plantation owners, southern politicians. We've already had that issue with Fremont nearly winning. With nearly winning in 1856. So they're all checking the story. By the way, this page shows it's panic page 57, and they're outside of Wall Street, and they're reading financial reports. They'll have little pieces of paper saying, I owe this much stock, and now the stock has lost value. They don't have as much money. This is a financial panic. These are all men who want to show they made it. And how you showed you made it in 1857? A silk hat. That's why they all have a hat. But today, it's like a really big deal. And it's been for the last 10 years. We're like a very expensive watch. That's like I made it. Or fancy car, things like that. And it kind of looks like this guy on the stagecoach is fishing for hats, but the panic. And then in 1858, an election for Senate in Illinois, remember this is still in state assemblies, would capture the news all across the country. Now, it still was, you had to be people who were really following politics in New York to follow the election in Illinois, but it was national news. Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, still relatively unknown, he was elected back in 1846 as a Whig, would run against the very powerful, ambitious Stephen Douglas, who everybody knows is going to run for president in 2 years. Now, they did a series of 7 debates around Illinois. And the big issue, Dred Scott. But don't forget, voters did not pick senators back then. It is still in the state assembly. Now, they both wore dark suits, but they wanted to contrast them in this watercolor. But it was a heck of a contrast because Lincoln was almost a foot taller than Douglas. So it was a contrast, very noticeable. Douglas, an able debater. But here's Douglas's problem. He knows he's probably going to win, but he has to look good for Southern Democrats because he wants to be president, and the Democratic Party is more Southern. So he's thinking national, while Lincoln is not. He's in a Northern party, and he knows he probably can't win, but he's thinking future. Get his name out there. This is where Lincoln would make his famous statement in Quincy, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Basically saying, despite Dred Scott, this sectionalism, no slave codes, cannot survive. And Dred Scott is not going to change it. Now, he's not an abolitionist, but you can imagine how Southerners took that. He's hiding his real feelings. She wasn't, but that's the way they looked at it. But the big issue was Douglas trying to straddle the fence. In Northern Illinois, in Freeport, he would make a statement that would soon be called the Freeport Doctrine. And he's trying to straddle the fence, north and south. He said, okay, we got Dred Scott, but states, if they don't pass slave codes, don't have to have slavery. You got that? If they don't pass slave codes, they don't have to have slavery. So even though Dred Scott technically opened up most northern states to slavery, we don't have to have it. So that's Stephen Douglas. I would like that picture of Douglas. He looks a little more candid. Normally they're all just waiting the 3 seconds for the exposure time. He looks a little bit more human there. Now, here's the deal. He's telling Southerners, I'm following Dred Scott. But he's telling Northerners, you don't have to have slave codes. Who did this make happen? Northerners didn't trust him because he didn't speak out against Dred Scott. Southerners didn't trust him because they wanted him to come out 100% for slavery. And Freeport Doctrine, Southern Democrats will not forget this. I keep on saying Southerners. Clearly, 40% of the population, they didn't like this either because they were enslaved and wanted it gone. So I'm trying to get out of the habit of saying the South, meaning all the South, because it was obviously bitterly divided. So when I say that, I have to try to catch myself. And there were dough faces in the North. So here he comes back. Who's that? John Brown. I like this picture. He's trying to he's purposely making a pledge against slavery, but he can't hold his hand, so it just has a little bit of shake. I think that's kind of cool, as he's pledging to stop slavery. So after what happened at Potawatomi Creek, he is a wanted man. And that's what he looked like in 1859. He grew his beard out as a disguise. His rough, very difficult life, his hair grew gray. He by then was in upstate New York with abolitionists. He had befriended Frederick Douglass and tried to convince Frederick Douglass to join his scheme. Douglass said, no way. Technically, Douglass was a conspirator. But this is a state crime. Laws were a little bit vague then. And his plan would be to attack the South and end slavery. John Brown's raid, sometimes called the Harper's Ferry raid. Southern politicians were bullying. The federal government was doing nothing, or led by dough faces. We have to act and force action. And I'll be clear about something. That's most of the time, that's what it requires. Those in power are comfortable. They don't want to change. Democratic dough faces, even if they didn't like slavery, were still going to do what's easiest for them. Make them uncomfortable and they change. This is going to make them very uncomfortable. His plan was to raid an armory in Harper's Ferry. They made muskets there because it had fast moving streams. The problem with Harper's Ferry is it's in the mountains. This is Harper's Ferry right here, the poster I got. And it's now in West Virginia. It's right on the Potomac River. It's now a national park, both a recreation area and the actual Harper's Ferry Historical Park. And that's what place that picture is taken from. It was called Jefferson's Roost. Thomas Jefferson used to go there and sit there and literally ponder going westward. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. I mean, I've been to Jordan, Montana, and it's even more beautiful than Jordan. It's been to Jordan. 4 months. It's beautiful, right? It's stunning. That's where our next field trip is. You guys are all going to get on a yellow school bus and go to Georgia to make out. I'm going to stay here. You're on your own. You can have a little food, right? It'll be a fun trip. Jordan's fine. Just very accident. And the problem is it's in the mountains. It's in the mountains, and therefore there's no plantations. So there's very few enslaved people. So we've got to get out of Harper's Ferry and move south where the plantations are to recruit slaves for rebellion. And so that's his plan. He's going to end slavery by the slave rebellion. He brought brand new sharp breech-loading rifles and pikes. They're 14 foot long, but they show what they look like. And then weapons they captured in Harper's Ferry to arm enslaved people. They go to the Appalachian Mountains and bring plantation to plantation. So he was talking one of the most terrifying things that the South could imagine. But there's a few things more terrifying than slave rebellion. Now, we don't know if he really meant it, because when he got there and took Harper's Ferry, he hesitated. He stayed in Harper's Ferry. Now, over 20 enslaved people risked their life to join Brown and fight with him. There is a myth that nobody joined him. That is false. Enslaved people joined and risked everything because they wanted freedom. But not that many, because there weren't many plantations. And he should have left right away. He did. And by hesitating, he got bottled up, because it's right along the river, it's right along the mountains, bottled up in a few buildings. Most famously, this is supposed to be a picture within the firehouse, small little building. And now he's captured. Cavalry and Marines came under Robert E. Lee, surrounded him, and people start to believe, we don't know. But maybe he didn't really start slave rebellion. Was he planning on being a monk? Dying for a righteous cause, getting it out there, letting people know what's going on. You can't escape it after John Brown's raid, north and south. We don't know, but this would be the net effect. So he'll be surrounded and captured. Here is a picture of them using a ladder to break through the armory. Brown would be caught inside. He would be wounded. One of his sons would be killed. And he would be tried and convicted of treason against the state of Virginia. which is so weird, treason against the state, that just doesn't go against my thinking, but goes against my thinking. But he'd be convicted. But in the trial, he would turn it into a fight against slavery. He would turn it into an argument of whether or not this country can survive the way it is with slavery. And that slaveholders were in all. Yeah. This is going to become, he will become one of the most controversial figures in American history. There are few Americans, in fact, there's no one single American more responsible for bringing on the actions that would lead to the end of slavery. Fortunately, it would also be Civil War, but lead to the John Brown. When he went to the gallows, he passed a note to one of the guards, and that's what the note said. It's misleading. He's not telling the truth about what he did. But it's also really clairvoyant, isn't it? What's he talking about here? Hurts away with blood. What's he talking about? Yes, Civil War. But when he says without much bloodshed, he's being disingenuous there. He was talking slave rebellion. So he's not telling the full truth, but still. Does anybody remember what young man, a member of a Richmond militia regiment called the Richmond Reds, who was there and witnessed the execution? They have become one of the most famous actors in America. John Wilkes Booth was there, small country, at his execution. The reaction to John Brown, we're jumping right to this. In the South, it seemed to prove their positive good theory. No slaves joined this. They would claim no slaves joined. Some did, but there weren't many. So this is totally disingenuous, but it seemed to prove their positive good theory. And then all free soilers, no, they're really John Brown's coming to cut our throat. Gee, I wonder if there'll be a president who's a free soiler. You get the point there. And lastly, they begin to strengthen the slave code, strengthen the militia. Once again, like Nat Turner. Remember Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. But this is going to spark free soil and some abolitionists. There are very few in the North, like this anti-slavery movement in the North. And so to many Northerners, they would be split. Because by definition, John Brown, using a new term, at that time was new, a terrorist. Using terror for to make a political statement. He's using terror, the threat of a slave rebellion to end slavery. A terrorist uses terror to make a political statement. Is he a terrorist? How about this is, if John Brown was a terrorist, who else was a terrorist? How about the Sons of Liberty? Remember the Sons of Liberty for the American Revolution? All the founding fathers, the British called them terrorists. Was he a terrorist or freedom fighter? It depends on what side you're on, doesn't it? Don't forget that. We'll come back to this. So, one more thing. To many Northerners, though, it proved, even if they were opposed to what John Brown did, the superiority of the system, and Union soldiers marched to war singing the song, John Brown's Body. And there's the words to it. It's John Brown's body lies a bouldering in the grave. Yeah, I know. But its soul is marching on. In 1864, the music for John Brown's body would become the music for the most famous song of the Civil War, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It seemed to confirm the North. So the divide is there. You can imagine, going in 1860, everyone's talking John Brown. Everyone's talking Dred Scott. Everybody's talking about this. And they're in the middle of a depression. Hey, let's get to election then. What a time. And the Democrats split. The Democrats met in Baltimore that summer for their convention. Remember, this is at a time where conventions pick the nominee. And Southern Democrats walked out. So everyone got that? I did not type that in. Southern Democrats walked out. Northern Democrats are left. And they chose Stephen Douglas, the little giant. Speaking with popular sovereignty, but because of the Freeport Doctrine, Southern Democrats left, and they would meet 2 weeks later in Charleston, South Carolina, folks. So Southern Democrats met and they made their own nomination. Right here. Former Senator, Secretary of War, ran for Vice President back in 1856. This was the era of facial hair. Wait till we get to the Civil War. Anybody know his name? C. Breckinridge. John C. Breckinridge. By the way, anybody know what uniform that is? I chose that uniform from 1864. He would become a general in the Confederate Army. So he would betray in running for president. And what was his position? States' rights. But remember, states' rights just meant pro-slavery. And then middle states, former Whigs, some Democrats thought, well, we need a less divisive president, and they called themselves the Constitutional Union, which basically said, let's follow the Constitution, which of course had been failing, and they chose another former presidential candidate. Everybody, you can guess what his name. I swear to you, I am not making this up. C. Bell. John C. Bell. So the Democrats are the South was basically split 3 ways. If the Republicans just nominate somebody who is not controversial, has no real background, but has a good reputation, what do we call an unknown candidate? A dark horse. And who do they choose? Abraham Lincoln. Don't worry about Hamlin. They will drop Hamlin for the ticket in 1864. Lincoln. Unknown. Unknown. What was the main point of Lincoln's platform? The Republican Party platform? Free soil. But he also wanted government aid for a railroad. A Homestead Act to steal land along the frontier and then give it to citizens of the United States, 160 acres. Also tariff and a vague thing for workers' rights, which would soon become not an issue in the Republican Party. But that's another story down the road. You like that picture of Lincoln? I like that one. That's 1860. And he did not have a beard when he ran for president. I just like that picture. Another one, he kind of looks more human than the actual staring look. Now, for various political reasons, Southern politicians have opposed all of this. So, when they left the Union, they all passed because there's no South. So Lincoln would get almost everything he wanted. The Homestead Act and the Transcontinental Railroad Act, we'll come back and talk about more later. The tariff a little bit more down the road. So that's Abraham Lincoln's proposal. And then all he had to do was his supporters. Nothing controversial. People did not campaign for themselves yet. And I should add one more thing. After he was elected president, a 13-year-old girl wrote him a note and said, "You would look better with a beard." So he grew a beard. And so when he was inaugurated, he had the beard, and that's how it started. So that's a split rail fence. We all know, we've seen those. Hard work splitting that. So he became known as Honest Abe, the rail splitter. So they focused on this free labor idea of him taking advantage of the opportunities of the North, starting with nothing and moving up. Here he is splitting a rail. Using the axe, also doubles as a sledgehammer. They're very heavy, those axes. That's another one of them splitting a rail. And here it is, the last rail split by Honest Old Abe, and it says the Democrats. And one thing he hated being called Abe. He hated, despised. Nobody called him Abe. In fact, he didn't like the name Abraham. His wife called him Mr. Lincoln. Whatever. It was the marriage had a lot of strength. But moving on, this is a picture of him. And isn't that picture terrifying? Doesn't it make him look like a zombie Abraham Lincoln? Who just not only brought this pig face thing, but like a Raggedy Ann doll back to life to come haunt the country? And look at that thing. Look at those eyes. It's terrifying. But this election would be one of the most controversial. You have to write the election again. I'm not putting it up there. This is a cartoon for John C. Bell, and that's glue. And he's trying to glue the map of the United States together, bring us together as Breckinridge, Douglas, and Lincoln tear it apart. Here's a Republican cartoon, and it's showing the old Democratic Party, donkeys split in two, Douglas and Breckinridge, and here comes the new Republicans in a new technology, the steam locomotive, crashing their way through it. But let's get to my personal favorite one. Here's Douglas racing Lincoln, but a split rail fence was in the way to the White House. And it says, here's Douglas, and you know it's Douglas right here, much. And it says, how can I get over this rail fence? And think about the rail fence. This is supposed to represent slavery as the fence. And it says, you'll find me in this here fence, Master Douglas. Meaning slavery is the issue that will stop Douglas. And there's Lincoln, it can't stop me, for I built it. The rail split. And what's Lincoln carrying over his shoulder? It's supposed to be an axe. But to me, it looks like he's carrying a ham on a stick. Anyone else know? Doesn't it kind of like an awful hand hair? But we're gonna jump right into, yeah, it's a creepy one with the two Democrats on that's oyster shells. I don't understand what it is either, but it's creepy. Wide awakes were supporters of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And this shows how the election was very militaristic. They would march in these basically processions, marching in step as wide awakes, as they're saying Republicans are now wide awake to Democratic bullying. No more will we turn a blind eye to what you're doing. We are gonna fight back. And a lot of this starts with John Brown and Potawatomi Creek. So these are the wide awakes. And they would carry torches and they'd be cut in front of the torch in the glass to make it look like an eyeball. So it made it look kind of scary, kind of almost like a cat's eye. When the election finally happened, Lincoln would be elected president. But look at the popular vote. Remember, that doesn't matter. But less than 40% of the population wanted Lincoln. He was not on the ballot in any state that joined the Confederacy, 11 states. Not even on the ballot. Yet remember, it doesn't matter. All that matters is who won the electoral votes in each state. And this is the most populous area, too. And he was elected president. Look how many votes Douglas got. 1.3 million. That's a lot for a split party. But because they're split, he only won 12 electoral votes. Lincoln is now president. Well, not yet. It's November. Lincoln would not be president for 6 months. It's not inaugurated back then until March. Today, the inauguration is January 20th. And in those 6 months, the Civil War would be. Well, Lincoln was not president. Everyone got that? It would begin in those 6 months. And this is going to happen again. Franklin Roosevelt will be elected in November 1932. 6 months before he's inaugurated, the country just about ended. It was that bad during the Great Depression. 2 different times. We have presidents elected, and our 2 greatest presidents, considered our 2 greatest. They came at a time where the whole country was falling apart and there were weak presidents. James Buchanan, a disaster. So what happened? Well, we need a musical interlude. You want a musical interlude? This is the Christmas time. And so we need something before we get the Civil War. I thought it's a nice little high school band. It's very pretty. Just wait. Then with the band, whole band comes in, it's sublime. Doesn't it sound like they're all with a bunch of kazoos? By the way, I feel so sorry. Okay. All right. So South Carolina would immediately start secession, immediately. And here's a northern, this is a northern cartoon anti-secession. And in South Carolina, it's Canada called the Peacemaker. Here's Buchanan, and he's talking secession. But where is Buchanan aimed? There's South Carolina. I'm not going to go to the whole anatomy thing, but I think you get it. Another one, secession, cutting off, despite yourself, they're going to fall off. And everyone knew secession was war. And on December 20th, 1860, South Carolina seceded. What were the reasons they seceded? Well, the first one we've talked about many times. Now they're going to be a congressional minority. There's going to be more slaves, more free states, and more population. As they saw, eventually, Republicans will vote restrictions on slavery. Next, free soil was John Brown. They just elected a party, a majority party of Republicans who were all John Browns coming to cut our throat. But here's the biggie. There was no Republican Party in the South. A party could be created. A Republican Party could be created, a Trojan horse, an enemy within, through patronage. Now, does anybody remember the term patronage? I've given you this term before. Do you remember, Sam? Yeah, government jobs to your friends. They could create positions, government jobs, and give them to people who say they're Republicans and now create Republicans in the South. And think of the point of view of the South. We're already outnumbered. We're now weak. We got a free soil. If we wait 4 years, there'll be more Republicans in the South. We'll be too weak. We got to go now. We'll never have another opportunity. And so they said this was a preventative strike because they're going to get us. Now remember, Lincoln said he would not touch slavery, but that's what that's what they believed. They called it a just and defensive war. And I should have. They said it was war. Despite what anybody's going to say after the fact, and people still say it to this day, secession meant civil war. They'll never have another chance. Every day they get weak. And this is really dangerous. This is exactly the same thing. For the same reason that Germany would help begin a series of events that would lead to Armageddon, World War II, World War I. And why Japan would attack Pearl Harbor. Never get another chance. We got to take the oil in the East Indies. We got to knock the Americans out so we get it. So, the funny thing about this was, it didn't look like it was going to pass. And so a few secessionists lied and said, if we don't secede today, Georgia will beat us. Georgia's going to secede tomorrow. We got to go down. And so they seceded so Georgia wouldn't be first. As it turned out, Georgia wasn't even close. But it started. And it was called secessionitis. If there's any doubt why they seceded, here is a quote from their secession, South Carolina's ordinance of secession. Can you read it? Is there any doubt why they seceded? Do we have to explain this? I think we got it, right? Here's Mississippi. All 11 states that seceded, all put as the number one reason was the hostility of the North and the Republicans for the new president, just so. They all put it down. A hostility to slavery. Now remember, the trigger was slavery in the territories and then the election of Lincoln. Hey, wouldn't secession be a great topic for the DBQ? Aren't I just telling you things right now for the essay? I give almost too much to you people. I shouldn't tell you anything else. You should just learn on your own. So it was called secessionitis. And it's really weird. Think of all the similarities. Citizens of the United States all spoke the same language. One of the biggest reasons for civil wars all worldwide are different ethnic groups of different languages fighting. That didn't happen in the United States. Okay, I know. Somebody from South Carolina and somebody from Boston might seem like different languages, but they're all basically the same. You've been to either place, you know what I'm talking about. We have a very bland accent in Montana. So, like religion, virtually every citizen of the United States was Christian or at least Christian adjacent. Financial system, a dollar
Even though it's shaky financial system, $1 in Boston can buy something, $1 in New Orleans can buy something. They have the same system. History, who are the founding fathers in the North? Lincoln, I'm sorry, that's Washington, Jefferson, Adams, etc. North and South. And what did people call themselves? North and South. What did they call themselves? American. The Confederates kept calling themselves Americans too. Why did they fight? What was the big difference? Ideology. It's ideology. All right, tomorrow I'll talk about writing a DBQ. One thing I'll tell you in the notes, and then we will start the video. Sound good? We're gonna watch part 2 of the cause. Please have that. And. Okay. What? And like I said, if you took AP Euro, there'll be a few differences, but it's certain thing for history and for me, not a big deal. I'm holding this. Oh my goodness, we got a limbo. I gotta shut this off. Or I'll get a copyright ding.